3 Stanley Cups, a Conn Smythe, a body that looked built for decades more at the highest level. Jonathan Toews didn't lose a step on the ice. He lost the ability to get out of bed. No concussion protocol, no torn ligaments, no timeline the trainers could pin to a whiteboard. The diagnosis didn't exist yet, and the player disappeared. The Chicago Blackhawks drafted Jonathan Toews 3rd overall in 2006. And within 2 seasons, the organization had already decided that everything they were building would run through him. He was named captain before the start of the 2008-09 season at 20 years and 79 days old, making him the 3rd youngest captain in NHL history at the time, behind only Sidney Crosby and Vinny Lecavalier. That is not a number you hand to a kid unless you've already decided he's the franchise. And Chicago had decided exactly that. By the time the 2009-10 playoffs were over, the decision looked prophetic. Toews put up 29 points in 22 postseason games, won the Conn Smythe Trophy as the most valuable player of the entire playoffs, and led Chicago to its first Stanley Cup since 1961. He was 22 years old when he lifted that cup, and he immediately became the youngest player ever to join the Triple Gold Club, having already won Olympic gold with Canada and a World Championship gold medal. That first cup was not a fluke, and the next 5 years proved it. The Blackhawks won again in 2013, beating Boston in 6 games, with Toews winning the Selke Trophy that same year as the league's best defensive forward, and they won a 3rd time in 2015 over Tampa Bay. 3 Stanley Cups in 6 seasons, all built around the same man's two-way game and the culture he enforced in that room every single day. The nickname Captain Serious was not ironic. It was descriptive. Toews played the game with a discipline that bordered on obsession, and that discipline showed up everywhere. Not just in the way he defended or won face-offs, but in the way he managed his body, managed his preparation, managed the distance between what was acceptable and what was not. In 2017, the NHL named its 100 greatest players of all time as part of the league's centennial celebration, and Toews made the list alongside Crosby, Gretzky, Lemieux, and Orr. He was 28 years old at the time, still in the middle of his career, and the league had already stamped him as permanent. And the reason the stakes matter is not just biographical. When a franchise builds its identity, its revenue, its coaching philosophy, and its entire marketing operation around one player for 15 years, that player stops being an employee and becomes infrastructure. The Blackhawks sold tickets, jerseys, and a vision of winning culture because of Toews. And nothing about Chicago's model worked without him in it. So when you hear what happened next, hold on to that. Hold on to what he was worth. Not in salary, but in structure. Because the system that profited from everything he built had no idea what to do when the thing that broke him had no name and no timeline. Sometime in early 2020, Jonathan Toews contracted COVID-19. The exact date has never been pinned down publicly, but what every credible source agrees on is that the virus hit him that year and that his body never fully recovered from it. He played all 70 games of the pandemic-shortened 2019-20 regular season before the league shut down in March. He played 9 playoff games in the Edmonton Bubble that summer and led the team with 5 goals. Nothing about his performance suggested anything was wrong. Then, on December 29, 2020, just before the start of the condensed 2020-21 season, the Blackhawks announced that their captain would not be joining the team at training camp and would be out indefinitely due to an undisclosed illness. Toews released a statement saying he was experiencing symptoms that left him feeling drained and lethargic, and there was no timetable for his return. That was all the public got. No diagnosis, no explanation, and no indication of when or whether he would play again. He missed the entire 56-game season. Now think about what the league had just put itself through to get back on the ice. The NHL spent the summer of 2020 building 2 playoff bubbles in Edmonton and Toronto, isolating players from families, renegotiating broadcast deals, and forcing through every obstacle imaginable to keep the season alive. The league treated the virus as a scheduling problem, a revenue problem, a logistics problem, and solved all three impressively. What it did not treat the virus as was a long-term health problem for the athletes whose bodies made that revenue possible. Toews was the cost that never appeared on the balance sheet. He came back for the 2021-22 season and played 71 games, scored 12 goals and 37 points, and won nearly 60% of his faceoffs. On paper, it looked like a comeback, but the people around him could see that the energy wasn't there in the way that it used to be, that the recovery between games was harder than it had ever been, and that discipline, the thing his entire career was built on, was not going to fix whatever this was. The 2022-23 season started the same way, with Toews pushing through symptoms that would not let up, and by late January, he had played 46 games and scored 14 goals, and looked at times like the player he had been. Then, in February, he stopped. The Blackhawks announced he was stepping away from the team to deal with health issues, and on February 21st, 2023, for the first time publicly, Toews identified himself as a long COVID patient. He had been dealing with chronic inflammatory response syndrome for over 2 years by that point, and now the long COVID diagnosis was layered on top of it, and the combination of the two was something he could no longer play through. He came back for the final stretch of that season on April 1st, played the last 7 games, and then the Blackhawks made it official. They would not be re-signing him. His contract expired, and on August 17th, 2023, Toews announced that he was not retiring, but that he would be sitting out the 2023-24 season entirely to focus on his health. He did not play that year, and he did not play the year after that either. From August 2023 through the fall of 2025, Jonathan Toews was gone from professional hockey entirely. The name of what Jonathan Toews was fighting is chronic inflammatory response syndrome, and the reason most people have never heard of it is that most of the medical establishment has spent years arguing about whether it's real. CIRS is a condition in which the body's inflammatory response, once triggered by a biotoxin, refuses to shut itself off. The immune system stays activated long after the original threat is gone, and the result is a collection of symptoms that overlap with a dozen other conditions. Crushing fatigue, brain fog, joint and muscle pain, an inability to recover from exertion, and a general feeling of systemic collapse that does not respond to rest and does not follow any predictable timetable. In Toews' case, the triggering biotoxin was COVID-19, and the inflammation it produced persisted for years after the virus itself had left his body. The problem with CIRS inside the culture of professional hockey is not that medical staff are incompetent. The problem is that the entire infrastructure of sports medicine is designed for a different kind of injury. When a player tears an ACL, there's a scan that shows the tear, a surgery that repairs it, a rehabilitation protocol that follows a known timeline, and a return to play date that everyone can point to on a calendar. The system is brilliant at handling acute injuries with visible mechanisms and clean endpoints. It knows how to fix what it can see. And everything that made Toews the most disciplined player of his generation, the preparation, the conditioning, the sheer refusal to quit, meant nothing against a condition that did not respond to effort. CIRS is none of those things. There's no scan that shows it, no surgery that repairs it. There's no rehabilitation protocol that follows a known timeline. The symptoms fluctuate day to day and week to week, which means the player looks fine on Tuesday and can barely function on Thursday. And when that pattern repeats itself for months and then years, the culture around it starts to shift from concern to skepticism. Not overtly, not cruelly, but in the way that any culture built on certainty starts to lose patience with something it can't measure or predict. Toews spent years inside that gap. He had access to the best doctors, the best facilities, and every resource professional sports could offer, and none of it produced a solution, because the system was not built to solve this kind of problem. You can search the websites of major sports medicine programs and the top hospitals in Chicago and find almost nothing on CIRS, nothing on biotoxin illness, nothing on chronic inflammatory cascades. For a player trying to get healthy inside an organization that needs him on the ice, that absence is a dead end. And so he left. Not the sport, not yet, but the system. In September of 2023, Toews traveled to India to work with a sadhu and undergo Ayurvedic treatment. He spent 5 weeks there in what he later described as an Ayurvedic detox, a practice called panchakarma that uses massage, herbs, and dietary protocols to address systemic inflammation. He posted about it on social media in November of 2024, writing that it had been almost 5 years of searching for a way to heal the inflammatory and immune system issues that took me out of hockey, and that the wisdom of Ayurveda has taught me that everything I experience, I'm responsible for. You can think whatever you want about Ayurvedic medicine. The point is that a 3-time Stanley Cup champion, a Conn Smythe winner, a man named one of the 100 greatest players in NHL history, had to fly halfway around the world and seek treatment entirely outside of Western sports medicine because every resource available to him inside the sport had run dry, and nobody in a position to build something better had bothered to try. On March 10, 2025, Jonathan Toews confirmed in an interview with The Athletic that he intended to return to the NHL for the 2025-26 season. He had been away for more than 2 years. He had rebuilt himself outside the system that was supposed to take care of him, and now he wanted back in. The question was whether anyone would take him. He was 36 years old, had not played a professional game since April of 2023, and carried a medical history that would have scared off most front offices. The Blackhawks had already moved on, and Toews himself said he was not seeking a return to Chicago. What he wanted was something the sport had never really offered him before, the chance to play at home. On June 20th, 2025, the Winnipeg Jets announced they had agreed to terms with Toews on a 1-year contract. The deal became official on July 1st at $2 million, a fraction of the $10.5 million he had earned annually during the peak of his Chicago career, and none of that mattered, because the story was never about the money. Toews was born in Winnipeg. He grew up playing youth hockey at the Dakota Community Center, which later renamed its facility the Jonathan Toews Sportsplex after his first cup. He donated $1 million to that community center in 2016. There was already a lake in Manitoba named after him. And now, after everything the illness had taken, he was coming home to play. He tweaked something in a preseason game against the Minnesota Wild and started the year on injured reserve, which is the kind of detail that makes you hold your breath when a player has been through what he's been through. But he was cleared for the season opener against Dallas, and from that point forward, he didn't miss a single game. Not one. 82 regular season games. All of them played every night for a full season. After 2.5 years away from the sport and 5 years of fighting a disease that nobody in professional hockey's medical infrastructure had been able to solve for him. The numbers were modest by the standards of what he used to produce. 11 goals, 18 assists, 29 points. A career low. But the face-off percentage told a different story. 62.1%. Among the best in the entire league. Proof that the competitive core of the player had survived, even if the peak offensive production had not. He played a bottom six role, drew power play time on the second unit, blocked over 30 shots, and brought something to that locker room that doesn't show up on any stat sheet. The credibility of a man who had won everything, and then lost everything, and then come back from it without the system's help. On May 4th, the NHL named Toews one of 3 finalists for the Bill Masterton Memorial Trophy, the award given to the player who best exemplifies perseverance, sportsmanship, and dedication to hockey, alongside Rasmus Dahlin of the Buffalo Sabres and Gabe Landeskog of the Colorado Avalanche. Landeskog won the award, but the finalist designation told the sport what it already knew about what Toews had done to get back on the ice. On June 19th, 2026, at the Jonathan Toews Sportsplex in the city where he was born, Toews announced his retirement at the age of 38. He said he was satisfied, fulfilled, and grateful. He said he had...
So obviously the last few years have been extremely difficult. So I guess in a way I kind of feel prepared for this moment. Ironically, I feel like I've learned so much more about myself and about life through the low points than I ever did when my career was at its height.
The disease took years from him. The prime of his career, seasons he'll never get back, and it left him rebuilding himself in a country halfway around the world because the sport he gave everything to had no mechanism for giving anything back. But it didn't get to write the ending. He came home, he played every game, and he walked away on his own terms, because that was the one thing the illness never got to take. Jonathan Toews had the fame, the money, and the access to spend years crossing the world, chasing a diagnosis that the system around him couldn't provide. The millions of people living with long COVID and CIRS right now don't have any of that. His story is the most visible version of an invisible problem that professional sports and mainstream medicine still have not solved. And if a 3-time Stanley Cup champion couldn't get answers inside the system, imagine what it looks like for everyone else. If these are the kinds of stories you want to stay close to, the Healthy Scratch membership is how you do that. Link below, you get early access to every video before it goes public, plus a free ebook when you join. Subscribe because the next story is already in the works, and you're going to want to be here for it.